What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Fellow Show. This is the first episode of an 8-part series. We're going to be looking at each division, going through all 4 teams in the division and just kind of looking back at the stats from last season, looking at the quarterback, running backs, receivers, and tight ends. It's kind of a fantasy review of what happened last year, and maybe we can kind of project what are we going to be looking at in 2025. So that's the purpose of this video. This is a huge document that I have that I use for my projections. And once we get the rookies drafted in their draft slots, that's when my projections come out. But for now, it's good to reflect and see what happened last year and learn a couple things. So today is the AFC South. And if you guys find this video useful, keep an eye out for the remaining 7 divisions. We got a lot of videos to come out over the next couple of weeks. But February is awesome. It's a time where I can kind of just relax and do some research on the 2025 draft prospects, do some data studies on some things and really just focus on projections and research and just getting better knowledge of the football players that are coming in and out. So here we go. This is the database here that I have pulled up. This is the Houston Texans. I've been doing projections since 2017, and I've been logging the stats since 2017. So we've been doing this for a while. So I kind of keep everything here at the top. And then this is the stats. These are the stats from 2024. So we have, a lot of data here at the end: target share, opportunity share, yard share, and then PPR, half PPR, and standard numbers. The Texans regressed a little bit. If we just look off the top here, and I like to kind of look at, 2024, 2023, year 1 to year 2 for CJ Stroud. They threw the ball a little bit less, but the same completion percentage, which was fine, but a huge drop in yards per attempt, which is a little – it's fine. I mean, we missed Nico Collins for a big chunk of this, but we're missing almost 600 yards here from the passing column. We dropped in touchdowns, a few more interceptions. Running the ball, we ran the ball less, but we got more output. We had almost 300 more yards, maybe about 250 more yards, and 5 more touchdowns. So good running game numbers. I think the offensive line just being healthier in 2024 than they were in 2023 really did a good thing for the running game. But overall, they ran a few less plays, maybe about 2 plays less per game, and the yards dropped a little bit, another 10-7 season. So by all means, a fine, okay season, not the best season out of Houston here. And we'll talk about some of the players that we're going to need to know about for 2025. So we'll just look at CJ Stroud here. 224 points on the year. I want to know what that is in a per game basis. I'm not quite sure. I think he did play the full season, and we like him going into year 3. But 2024 was a little bit of a disappointing. He didn't really drop too much in percentage, so that's fine. He was at 63.16% in 2024, 63.69%. I want to see that get higher. I want to see that above 65, 66 in that range for 2025. And then the 8.23 yards per attempt dropped all the way down to 7.01. Again, Nico Collins missing a good chunk of time, and some of the injuries to the other receivers played a part in that as well. CJ threw 23 touchdowns last year, 20 in 2024. And then the one thing that I like about Stroud this year is he ran the ball a little bit more. 39 rushing attempts in 2023, 167 yards. And he did that a little bit more in 2024. So 52 attempts, 233 yards, no rushing touchdowns, though. He did have 3 as a rookie. So maybe those bounce back in 2025. I think at the end of it, though, we're just overall disappointed. CJ Stroud was like the QB 5 or 6 off the board for fantasy drafts this year. And he just didn't even come close to that. He was probably the most overvalued quarterback in terms of the drafting ADP. I mean, he's all the way down here at QB 18. He played full 17 games. 13 points per game is not what we want to see from CJ Stroud. So he's just a middling QB2 in 2024. Maybe he bounces back and finishes, around QB 10. He's going to have to pick up the touchdowns. He's going to have to get over 4,000 yards and then maybe fall into the end zone a little bit. So a little bit of a regression here, but not terrible. There's a few mistakes, not mistakes, but just injuries and disappointing things that happened to the rest of the offense. But let's look at the running game here. Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce, Cam Akers, Dare Ogunbowale, and JJ Taylor. A huge upgrade over what happened last year. Devin Singletary was actually a good player for them in 2023. And then Dameon Pierce, of course, he was injured and in and out of the lineup last year, but he bounced back as well in 2024. So he looked good here. So that duo of Singletary and Pierce pretty much just all went to Joe Mixon. He did miss a few games with an ankle sprain, but over 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, and he was very active as a receiver. If we're looking at this, actually, a total of 91 targets to the receivers in 2024, and the year before, only 84. So CJ leaning in a little bit more into the running backs, which is nice. And then basically just all of that flowing to Mixon and mostly Ogunbowale, who's the third down guy. So Pierce got healthy at the end of the year. Akers was kind of the RB2 earlier in the season. Ogunbowale was just the third down back all year long. As long as Joe Mixon returns to the team, and do they have him? I believe Mixon's under contract. I don't see him on this free agent list. The impending free agents for the Texans: Diggs, obviously Deontay Johnson, Robert Woods. We'll see about backup Case Keenum here. Ogunbowale is a free agent, so there might be some receptions available. So we'll watch for those positions. So Mixon returns, and he's going to be a guy that, he's up there in age, but he did look good for the most part. He kind of struggled down the stretch. He started off the season really hot. But he's kind of like a James Conner type, where we know he's the bell cow back when he's healthy, and he's going to be a starting running back 2 for us. So good running game from the Texans this year. And keep an eye on Dameon Pierce, man. He really balled out at the end of the year. 7.33 yards per attempt, 2 rushing touchdowns, 40 carries for 293 yards. I do want to see him more involved as a receiver because he can catch the ball. He did catch 30 passes as a rookie, and he kind of returned to that rookie form. So we'll keep an eye on Dameon Pierce, maybe just someone to monitor in best ball leagues and towards the end of the rounds. And then let's look at the receivers, because this is where kind of everything went wrong for CJ Stroud and the Texans. We're throwing the ball to Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Diggs, John Mechie, Robert Woods, Xavier Hutchinson, Deontay Johnson, and Steven Sims. We're going to kind of ignore the bottom few guys. Hutchinson played a lot when Nico was out, but he can't really earn targets. And all of his targets are pretty much contested targets. So not a guy that I'm interested in Dynasty at all. But we have Nico Collins, who, I got him ranked as a top 10 Dynasty receiver. For him to miss, what was it? Was it 6 games? I can't remember. He was leading the league in yards when he went down. So he could have been a huge part to CJ Stroud having a stronger second season. But Nico, where are you, Nico? Let me go to PPR here. All right, so wide receiver 23. He did play 12 games, so he missed 5. But in points per game, 17.6. If I filter by there, that's going to put him wide receiver 10, basically on par with CeeDee Lamb. So it could have been a huge season for Nico. So we're going to continue to draft him high. I think I have no issues with drafting Nico Collins to be my wide receiver 1. If you want to grab him in probably round 2 of redraft leagues, if he slides to round 3, that's crazy. But let's talk about Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs. Now, Tank Dell, coming off that really bad injury back in 2023 with the broken fibula, he was not himself all year long. He struggled to get open deep. His rookie year, 47 catches, 75 targets, just over 700 yards and 7 touchdowns, good for almost 15 yards a catch. He was down about 2 yards per catch in 2024. He did catch more passes, and he had more targets. But the yards were way down, touchdowns down big time as well. He did have 7 touchdowns last year, down to 3, and he just wasn't the impact player. And now that he's, got a very, very serious injury again here, I don't know if he's going to be ready to play. I would assume he's a PUP candidate to start the year, and he's probably just going to be a guy that I'm not interested in drafting in 2025. You could probably get him at the end of your draft and hold on to him. He's just not the profile that I want to wait for. And then you have Stephon Diggs here, who was playing fine, 47 catches, 64 targets, almost 500 yards, and 3 touchdowns. If we look at his fantasy points per game, where was Mr. Diggs? Diggity Diggs. He was wide receiver 18, 15 points per game. He only lasted 8 games coming off we got the ACL tear now, and only 2 bad games with 7 points. Like, he was going to have a nice season had he continued. And I think this is probably the biggest reason why CJ Stroud really struggled. He's missed Nico for 5 games. We missed Stephon Diggs for 9 games, and then Tank Dell at the end of the year as well. So just never a full healthy complement. And then really no receiver stepped up. I think John Mechie is kind of fine as your wide receiver 4 or 5, but he's not really a starting caliber receiver. He did play okay, 24 catches, 254 yards, and a touchdown. But we got to find someone for the Houston Texans. This is one of their big needs in the draft. I want them to draft a receiver that could compete for number 2, number 3 duties and potentially be that starter right away. Because, again, we're losing Diggs. Deontay's not there. We need to upgrade this wide receiver 2 spot. And honestly, the tight end spots down here, Dalton Schultz was fine, 53 catches, 85 targets, 532 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's just not a playmaker. Cade Stover is actually a guy that kind of interests me from a long-term dynasty perspective. He's worth holding on into in deeper leagues, but Schultz is still under contract. I expect him to be back. I don't know if they have out with his contract at all, but he's still there. Good production from the tight ends. I mean, he threw it 110 times to the tight ends. That's pretty much equivalent to what he had the year before. About 900 yards to the tight ends, and yards were down to the tight ends this year. So maybe getting a tight end that can, be a little bit more athletic than a Dalton Schultz, someone that could stretch the seams a little bit, could help them get more vertical and get more yards down the stretch. But the Texans, they got a lot to look at. Their defense is really good. So focusing on the offense, maybe, I don't know if they need offensive line help in this draft, but looking hard at a wide receiver. It could be first round, could be second round. For sure, day 1 or day 2, I think they need to upgrade that position. But that's the review of the Houston Texans. And we'll move on to the Indianapolis Colts. If you guys are still with me, don't forget to like the video. Subscribe if you are new to the channel. We got a lot of videos coming out in February and don't want you to miss them. Let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts. Year 2 of Shane Steichen and Jim Bob Cooter. Mixed reviews here, man. We saw a lot of Gardner Minshew, just a little bit of A-Rich in 2023. We saw a little bit more Anthony Richardson in 2024 and a lot of Joe Flacco. They basically split the plays about 50-50, I think, when it came down to final starts here. And just mixed reviews on the Colts as a whole. If we just look at the comparisons from 24 to 23, they threw the ball less in 2024, product of Anthony Richardson playing a little bit more. Completion percentage dropped almost 5.5%. Again, Anthony Richardson playing more. Passing yards went down, but yards per attempt went up a little bit. I think that's part of Joe Flacco playing and Richardson's deep ball playing into this a little bit. Touchdowns went up by 2, a lot more interceptions, which is a problem. And then the rushing game was pretty sweet here. And that's, again, a product of Anthony Richardson. We're starting to see these numbers turn over into a more rushing style offense with some big play down the field stuff here. Better yards per attempt, almost 500 rushing attempts, and then about the same touchdowns, a few more fumbles. Overall, they ran a few less plays, maybe about 2 plays per game less, maybe 3 plays per game less. Running the ball runs a little bit more clock off. If you throw the ball, you're going to have more plays. And then about the same, pretty much the same output in yards and basically the same record. So the Colts kind of treading here. We don't know what to think of this team. They're entering healthy, though. I think that's the good thing. Richardson's healthy. JT's healthy. All the receivers are healthy. And we still got to find a tight end. But what the hell do we do with Anthony Richardson? I think there's a legit possibility the Colts draft a quarterback, whether it's round 3 or 4 or something, just to put a guy there that if Richardson really can't get it together, someone that they could throw in at the end of 2024 or 2025 and see what happens. In terms of fantasy points per game, Richardson with those legs, man, he's still getting fantasy points. He's in 14.6 points per game. He played 11 games. I'm not sure if that's an accurate number, though. I mean, he didn't really finish this game against Pittsburgh. So probably in the 15 to 16 point per game range, which still that's, a middling QB2. He's not the top 5, top 10 QB that we were drafting him in 2024. His numbers actually, though, on a per game basis looked okay. Let's take a peek at those real quick. So 26, and then he kind of struggled weeks 2, 3, 4, 5, or maybe 7, and then he played a little bit better down the stretch. So I like the 28, the 13, the 19, the 13, and the 20. I can stomach the 13s if I'm getting a 20 and a 28 every now and then. But we need the consistency from this guy here. In games where he's completing high percentages of passes, that's when the fantasy points follow because we know the rushing column is going to be there. But we need him to really lock in as a passer in 2025. And again, small improvements. Actually, a big disappointment here. 59% passing in rookie season down to 47 in 2024, and that's not good. And then his interceptions ballooned to 12, which is, over 1 per game here per start. The rushing column is fantastic. We love that. But if he's not getting it done as a passer, we're going to have concerns about him. So we have to watch for the draft and see if they do address the quarterback position. Maybe that lights a fire underneath him. But I still like his receiving weapons. I think he can get this number back closer to 60% or above, but he's just got a lot of work to do. We don't really need to talk much about Jonathan Taylor. It was nice to see him healthy the whole season. He missed a few games, if I recall, with Sermon and Goodson filling in. These guys are just, very poor backup level guys. And Jonathan Taylor is fantastic, man. 300 rushing attempts, 1,400 yards, 11 touchdowns. I want to see him unleashed as a receiver. I know he's not a great receiving back, but at this point, this is like Nick Chubb usage, and that for fantasy, I don't really like that in a full PPR setting. I think if you play half PPR, underdog, best ball, that kind of format, that's where he shines a little bit brighter. He still had a great season, tons of yards, but man, we're giving Trey Sermon 19 targets, and Goodson's a good receiving back, but if we could get Jonathan Taylor 40 to 50 targets in a year, I would feel much better about that. But it's hard to grade, the skill players for the Colts because we had half a year of Joe Flacco, who throws more per game to the running backs and all the receivers, and their numbers get inflated. And when Richardson plays, though, all those numbers come down in terms of targets. But we like, I guess, let me just take a look here. Let's look at the Colts impending free agents real quick. Big Mo Cox, Doolin, the receiver, Trey Sermon. We'll see if he returns. Juwan Winfrey. Okay, so nobody of note here as far as skill players. We'll see if they lose Mo Ali. But the receivers, man, this is a good receiving core. Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, Adonai Mitchell, and Alec Pierce actually led the way with yards and touchdowns this season. I like this group. This is one of the more skilled top 4 receiver groups in the NFL. And Richardson really likes throwing the deep ball to Alec Pierce. That's pretty evident. He likes Josh Downs. I think that's his number 1 target. We saw Michael Pittman Jr. soar with Joe Flacco this year. And I think going forward, if we're projecting Anthony Richardson to play in 2025 and be the full guy, I don't really know if I want a receiver here unless they're really, really cheap. I guess in best balls, I'll take Alec Pierce with one of my late round picks. But I'll be looking at Josh Downs because I think he's Richardson's go-to guy. He led the team in receptions, almost in yards and targets as well. And he did have 5 touchdowns on the year. He might be the most consistent player for a redraft fantasy, like where you're starting these guys manually every week. So from that perspective, I think Downs is the one. I'm probably trying to sell Michael Pittman Jr. if I could. I don't know what his contract looks like, but if Richardson's playing, I just don't know how much value I put on these Colts receivers here. And then Adonai Mitchell, man, he struggled. 23 receptions, 55 targets, 312 yards. Very skilled player. He reminds me a lot of George Pickens, but his game does not really compare or complement well with Anthony Richardson. I think Alec Pierce's game is probably the best suited for what Richardson does, is throw deep. And as far as being accurate and getting, precise with route running, Mitchell and Richardson just weren't on the same page in a lot. And right now, a promising second round pick. He's probably a second round pick in your dynasty drafts. I think you're holding on to him. We're going to see what happens here. But he's still the number 4 receiver on this Colts team. He didn't do anything to hop Pierce or any of the other guys ahead of him. I don't think the Colts are drafting a receiver. Maybe they draft a backup running back, but that's probably it. And then they just don't use tight ends, man. They use all 4 of these guys equally the same pretty much, and just not enough for us to care about for fantasy. Even if we remove Mo Cox, 12 catches and 147 yards, that still doesn't even make any of these guys usable here. So unless they go out and sign somebody that's like of note, or trade for a tight end, or maybe they draft one of those tight ends because there's 2 guys in the first round being projected right now. If they draft a tight end, I would be interested. But again, Anthony Richardson's the quarterback. We have to sprinkle a little bit of concern there with pass catchers. So what am I doing for 2025 here? I think Richardson's fine. He's not being drafted. He's probably not being drafted in a 1 QB league, but for super flex leagues, I think he's okay as your QB2. He's going to be a top 15 quarterback in terms of points per game, I would say. And then, if you needed a backup QB3 just in case he misses time, because he's going to miss time, which is his playing style. But Jonathan Taylor is really the only must-own Colts player. if you get him in like a full PPR league, he looks great as a running back too. Just because we know he's going to get his yards, we know he's going to get his touchdowns, and he's going to have a safe floor pretty much every week. He just doesn't have the juice that someone like a Jahmyr Gibbs or Bijan would have because of the rushing column, but he's shown that in the past. So maybe that comes back around here. But if I just look real quick at the full PPR numbers for Jonathan Taylor, I mean, three bad games all year, 9, 7, and 3.5. You can get by with the 7s and the 9s. It's just we can't have these. But he was dominant down the stretch. Like you might have won a fantasy championship if you had JT on your team down the final few weeks here. But that's enough on the Colts. Let's move on to Jacksonville. Yeah. And if you guys watch my stuff, you guys know I have a soft spot for Jacksonville. I want to root for Trevor Lawrence. I love Brian Thomas Jr. These are my dudes. Let's just, before I get into the Jags, let's look at their impending free agents. Maybe they bring back Mac Jones. I thought he was a fine backup just in case. It sounds like Trevor Lawrence and his shoulder is going to be just fine. But overall, like Dearness Johnson's kind of a third string running back. Tim Jones down here, a backup receiver. We're not losing anybody of big note here. Maybe they resign Brandon Scherf and make that running game better behind that offensive line. But it's really hard to grade this 2024 season just because we missed so much time from Trevor Lawrence. And they had been losing a lot of games early with Trevor Lawrence, but I want to just note that there were a lot of one-score games. Like this Jags team just wasn't very consistent. We missed Evan Ingram for a chunk of time at the beginning of the year. Christian Kirk got hurt early, and then obviously it all kind of snowballed when Trevor Lawrence went down. Now, Trevor Lawrence when Christian Kirk goes down, Trevor Lawrence was starting to feed Brian Thomas Jr., and we started to see flashes of what he could be doing. And then he gets hurt. Mac Jones comes in. That kind of derails for a few weeks, but then Mac Jones kind of dials it back up, and he finds a way to get Brian Thomas Jr. the ball. We see Trevor Lawrence come back in and play, a half of football before getting hurt again. And then Mac Jones picked it back up, and Brian Thomas Jr. finished as one of the best fantasy receivers in football down the stretch. All right, let me pull this up here because Brian Thomas Jr. he's a stud. And I'm just on Fantasy Pros here. We're going to filter. So we'll go week 18. So on a full season basis, Brian Thomas Jr. was wide receiver 4. That's standard. Let's go to PPR. In full PPR, he was still wide receiver 4. But if I go, let's see here. So from weeks 13 on, because that was after their bye week, weeks 13 through 18, Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver 2. Like there's a legit chance with a full season of Trevor Lawrence that he could be the wide receiver 1 in fantasy football next season. So he's a player that I love. But let's kind of dissect this stuff a little bit. So Trevor Lawrence played pretty much all of 2023, had a fine season, and he had been playing okay to start the year. Let's look at some of his numbers here in terms of fantasy numbers. And his fantasy points per game are going to be lower because he got knocked out of, I think, 2 games. He got hurt early in that Packers game, I believe. No, that was Brian Thomas Jr. Anyways, he got hurt a couple games that knocked him out early. But for a while here, like weeks 4 through 9, you're getting 15, 21, 17, 13, 23, and 15.6. A really strong QB2 for Superflex leagues. And you can see the yards. The yards you're hitting 300s. You're hitting 2 touchdowns in a game. So I have reason for optimism here that Trevor Lawrence could be a solid top-end QB2 in 2025. He ran the ball fine, 4.5 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns. We don't really need to talk about Mac Jones. Mac Jones actually threw the ball at a higher completion percentage, and he played well enough to keep the Jags in some games here. But let's kind of we'll move on to the running backs here because I think that was where one of the bigger developments was in 2025 for the Jags. And that's Tank Bigsby, 168 attempts to lead the team, 766 yards to lead the team, 7 rushing touchdowns, and then just not really used as a receiver. So we have like a full-on Tank Bigsby's the lead running back situation, and Travis ETN is more of a third down back. Now, they still ran ETN a good amount, 150 carries, but back in 2023, I mean, ETN was a 1,000-yard back on 267 carries. Bigsby only ran the ball 50 times. So he gets 3 times the workload that he did as a rookie. ETN's receptions numbers come down. His rushing volume comes down dramatically. And only 2 touchdowns on the year, down from 12 the year before. So a huge swing in his dynasty value and his redraft value. I mean, I don't know if we want ETN on our fantasy rosters going forward, especially in a dynasty league. I mean, I think the window to sell is probably done now that Tank Bigsby looked like a really good running back, and he's probably a guy that's going to continue to get more work in 2025 because he was the better runner between the tackles, short yardage, and ETN still proved to be a really good receiving back. So if anything, I think we're probably going to be projecting Bigsby to go drafted higher than ETN in 2025. And if the Jags are a better team where they can run the ball more and play for some, play ahead for some leads, that could look really good too for Bigsby's numbers. So he's going to probably be, I don't know, like a Brian Thomas Jr. type running back the last couple of years, a guy that could flirt with 1,000 yards and 8 to 10 touchdowns, not really be used as a receiver, but he could develop there. So I just, we're probably buying Bigsby right now and selling ETN in terms of redraft, and we'll see who they bring in as their number 3 running back. Now, the receivers, we don't really need to talk much about the other guys here. I think Gabe Davis was kind of a failed experiment, 20 receptions on 42 targets, 239 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's going to be probably the number 3 receiver next year. I hope Christian Kirk can come back healthy, and we just need those 2 guys healthy to play alongside Brian Thomas Jr. To help with some coverage, potentially going Brian Thomas's way. But for 2025, I really don't know if I'm going to be drafting a lot of Christian Kirk. I'm probably not drafting a lot of Gabe Davis, although he could be fine in best ball leagues. But it's all about Brian Thomas Jr. In my QB or my 1 QB dynasty rankings update the other day, I had Brian Thomas as the 12th highest player. And again, I think this was like a disaster season for the Jags. He played half a year with Trevor Lawrence, half a year with Mac Jones. Dude's really freaking good. He balled out with Mac Jones. Sky's the limit for him. He should probably be a top 5 dynasty receiver. I think I have him ranked too low. I think I have him like 7, 8, or 9, somewhere in that range. But draft as much Brian Thomas Jr. as you can in 2025 is basically what I'm saying. Let's finish. I do think the Jags should look at adding a receiver because we know Gabe Davis isn't getting it done. I don't know how much longer Christian Kirk's going to be able to be productive. He seems to get hurt every now and then. I think he broke his clavicle or shoulder or something, so we'll watch for that. But I wouldn't be opposed to them adding a solid contributor here, whether it's a number 2 or number 3 receiver, because they don't really have much outside of Thomas, Kirk, and Davis. They just have a revolving door. Parker Washington's okay. If they can bring in somebody that compete with him or maybe sign a veteran or something, I think that would be a wise move. And then the tight ends, man. So I think they could potentially get rid of Evan Ingram in 2025. We saw Brenton Strange lead the way with 411 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. Ingram still played well when he was out there, 47 catches, 365 yards. He was kind of just like a short yardage check down guy, though. Did not have a healthy season, so he didn't come close to his 114 catches the year before. But I do think that if Ingram's back with the team, he's going to be a guy that I want. Outside of Brian Thomas Jr., I'm probably drafting Evan Ingram as well on some of my teams. And then we mentioned Tank Bigsby as well. But I do think Brenton Strange could be the guy, like long-term, man. Like keep him on the end of your dynasty roster because he looked pretty nice. I don't think he's like a top 5 dynasty tight end going forward, but he could have like a Jake Ferguson type season one of these years where he just runs hot and plays really well with Trevor Lawrence. So keep an eye on Brenton Strange. I think he's a sleeper. And then overall, the Jags, man, it's hard to grade it because, I could look and compare these numbers from 2024 to 2023, but just so much bad stuff happened that I don't really know if it's worth it. But I do think there's optimism for the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2025. And I just want to see Trevor Lawrence healthy, and maybe the Jags can quickly recover and be back to like 9-10 wins and flirt with a wild card playoff bid. We'll see. All righty. And then the Tennessee Titans. What a mess. Do they have the number 2 overall pick? Let me pull up Tankathon here. I believe they're pick 2. We would assume they're drafting. They have the number 1 pick. My bad. They're drafting a quarterback, whether it's Shador or Cameron Ward. They're getting a franchise quarterback here. Brian Callahan, his first year, he was the former offensive coordinator for the Bengals. This is a tough year. They gave Will Levis a try. They just didn't have enough weapons. They lost DeAndre Hopkins early in the year for the trade, and they need somebody to catch the ball. But we'll do our due diligence here. I think Will Levis is just going to be a backup quarterback for the rest of the league here, or the rest of his career. He played fine. He makes a lot of errors. He can run the ball okay. But we're moving on from Will Levis. I think in a super flex league, you could probably let him go this offseason, as we're fully expecting the Titans to use their number 1 pick on a quarterback. Mason Rudolph filled in fine. He actually was just okay. He had some fantasy relevance down the stretch, I think, in super flex leagues. But we're not going to talk about the quarterbacks here. They didn't have one, haven't had one since Ryan Tannehill left town. And now we're looking at a number 1 overall quarterback. Now, the one thing we could look at is the running game. Now, not much changed from, they had Derrick Henry in 2023. And now in 2024, they get basically the same output as having Derrick Henry on their team. So maybe it was wise to move on from him, and it would have been nice to keep him. But 450 attempts, about the same as 2023, about the same rushing yards. They did lose a little bit yards per carry, down a few touchdowns. But overall, Tony Pollard looked good. 260 carries, almost 1,100 yards. He was low on touchdowns, and he caught the ball a lot. So there's hope for Tony Pollard to be a running back too, I think, in 2025. We do need to worry about Tajay Spears, though, who got some run towards the end of the year. The Titans, they did treat Tony Pollard as kind of the bell cow back, but I know Tajay missed a lot of time throughout the year. He wasn't really healthy until the end of the year. That's when he started playing good and getting touchdowns. But I do think Pollard probably could be a low-end RB2. And then with Tajay here, he's a guy that you can put at the end of your bench. He might be a best ball guy that just fills some weeks for you. Or if Pollard does go down, we have potentially a starting running back too with Tajay Spears. And he looked okay. He catches the ball well. That's one thing he does really, really well. Still not a great in between the tackles runner, but he can bust some big plays. So Tajay, just probably not a guy we're drafting in redraft unless you want to handcuff Tony Pollard or just get another handcuff situation. And then Chestnut, Josh Kelly, whatever here. But I think the running game is solid, and it should be a good thing for the rookie quarterback to lead on in 2025. Now we need to talk about this mess at receiver. Kevin Ridley looked good. Will Levis is not the most accurate guy. Mason Rudolph, not the most accurate guy. But Kevin Ridley had some big blow-up games, 64 catches to lead the team, 120 targets to lead the team, over 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns. He also ran for a touchdown. I think Calvin Ridley is not a guy I'm super excited about in 2025, but he does deserve, the consideration to be like a wide receiver 3 on your fantasy team. Let's see where he finished. He did finish as wide receiver 24, so clocking in as a low-end RB, a low-end wide receiver 2 is totally fine. In PPR, he actually came in at 27. So big yard per play guy. Touchdowns should probably go up. He only had 5 in 2024. I think if they do bring in Cam Ward, Shadur Sanders, that should boost Calvin Ridley's floor. And I know he's up there in age, but he's still got some juice, I think. And then what the hell? Nick Westbrook-Akina was just catching touchdowns. He's going to be on the team in 2025. He's not a guy we're drafting, I think. But he can play. He's a solid, number 3, I think, number 4 receiver. Not really going to care for fantasy football, though. I think the Titans really need to draft a number 2, number 3 receiver prospect this year. Obviously, they're spending their first pick on a receiver. But if they wanted to, take a receiver day 2, please, and infuse this team with some talent, because Jaquan Jackson, Mason Kinsey, Traylon Burks will pour one out for Tay Martin, Bryce Oliver, Tyler Boyd's there. Like, this is a huge weakness for this team. So we need a tight end, or we need a receiver to go with our rookie quarterback. And then let's talk tight ends here. Chico Okonkwo was quiet most of the year, and then he was a starting tight end 1 the final few games here. Let me actually look at this, because I think Chico Okonkwo, weeks 15, he had 14 points, 19, 10, then he didn't play week 18. But he was a fringe tight end one for you guys down the stretch in fantasy championships and fantasy playoffs. He might be a guy that continues to grow. I mean, last year he did have 54 catches, 528 yards, and a touchdown. The year before that, he showed good numbers as a rookie. So he kind of backed up what he was doing in his second year. And he might be a guy that year three, sometimes it takes tight ends a few years to get going. He might be a guy that could be drafted. I for sure will draft him as a tight end 2 in best ball leagues. And he could be a security blanket for the rookie quarterback. So I like Chig Okonkwo. I have to dive into some more of the advanced metrics and see how he was in terms of, targets per route run and yards per route run and all those things. But I like Chig Okonkwo. I still like Josh Wiley too. I think Wiley's a crafty player, kind of a good all-around tight end here, and he was involved as well. So they do play a lot of 2 tight end stuff. It's a team that wants to run the ball. Cincinnati has always had kind of a revolving door at tight end. We saw that this year too, even without Brian Callahan. But hopefully we can get Chig Okonkwo up to maybe 80 to 90 targets. Right now, he's kind of their number 2 receiver. So we need to improve that number 2 target. The Titans, the future is exciting because you're getting a new potential franchise quarterback. You're going to be year 2 of Brian Callahan. The team has a solid defense for the most part, and we have a good running game. We got a little bit to build on. I don't think they're a playoff team in 2025, but if they get the quarterback right, we could maybe think about that in 2026. So there you have it. I just talked for 37 minutes. If you guys like this video, please let me know in the comments. I have 7 more of these to go. I'm thinking I'm going to go do the NFC South. That'll either be tomorrow night or Tuesday night. But for me, this is just helpful to look at the things that happened last year, project a little bit into next year, and also see what teams might be looking at in the draft. So this was a lot of fun to make the video for you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Again, don't forget to like the video, subscribe if you are new. We'll see you in the next one. Peace. Got me feeling icy.